Viva! I began, and felt ashamed as I took a deep breath and pronounced the hated name. Just in case I should go on a rampage again, Mama confiscated the old radio. What we need to know, we'll know soon enough. And she was right, too. Little bits of news leaked in, sometimes from the least likely people. My old friend Elsa, she had married the journalist Roberto Suarez, who was assigned to the National Palace, and though critical of the regime, wrote the flowery feature articles required of him. One night, long ago, he had kept Manolo and me, as well as Elsa, in stitches with tales of his journalistic escapades. He had been held in prison once for 3 days for printing a picture in which Trujillo's bare leg showed between the cuff of his pants and the top of his sock. Another time, in a misprint he hadn't caught, Roberto's article had stated that Senator Smathers had delivered an elegy instead of a eulogy of Trujillo before the joint members of the United States Congress. That time, Roberto was put in jail for a month. I had thought for sure the Suarezes would join our movement. So when Leandro moved to the capital to coordinate the cells there, I mentioned the Suarezes to him as a likely couple. Elsa and Roberto were contacted and declared themselves friendly, but did not want to join. Now, in my hard times, my old friend sprang to my side. Every week since our release in August, Elsa had driven up from the capital to visit her elderly grandfather in La Vega. She would then swing up to Santiago, butter up Peña, she was good at this, and get a pass to come see me. Knowing we were in straitened circumstances, she brought bags of old clothes that looked fairly new to me. She claimed she couldn't fit into anything after her babies had been born, and she'd gotten big as a cow. Elsa, always exaggerating. She had the same good figure as always, as far as I could tell. But look at these hips, please. Just look at these legs, she'd remind me. Once she asked me, "How do you stay so trim?" Her eyes ran over my figure in an appraising way. "Prison," I said flatly. She didn't mention my figure again. Elsa and Roberto owned a boat, and every weekend they took it out. To fish, Elsa winked. At sea, they picked up swan broadcasts from a little island south of Cuba, as well as Radio Rebelde in Cuba and Radio Rumbos from Venezuela. "It's a regular newsroom out there," said Elsa, every visit catching me up on the latest news. One day, Elsa appeared, her face flushed with excitement. She couldn't sit down for a minute, not even for her favorite pastelito snack. She had news to tell me that required an immediate walk in the garden. "What is it?" I said, clutching her arm when we were halfway down the anthuriums. "The OAS has imposed sanctions. Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela." Elsa counted them off with her fingers. "Even the gringos. They've all broken relations." She and Roberto had been out on the boat Sunday and had seen an American warship on the horizon. "The capital is like this." Elsa rubbed her fingers together. "Roberto says by next year." Next year? I was alarmed. By then, who knows what can happen? We walked a little while in silence. Far off, I could hear the shouts of the children, playing with the big, bright beach ball their tia Elsa had brought them from the capital. Dede tells me I shouldn't talk to you about all this, but I said to her, "Dede, it's in Minerva's blood." I told her about that time you almost shot Trujillo with a toy arrow, remember? I had to step in and pretend it was part of our play. I wondered which of us had revised the past to suit the lives we were living now. "Ay, Elsa, that's not how it happened." Well, anyhow, she told me about the time you freed your father's rabbits because you didn't think it was right to have them caged. That story was remembered my way, but I felt diminished hearing it. And look at me now. What do you mean? You've gained a little weight. You're looking great. She ran her eyes over me, nodding in approval. Minerva, Minerva, I am so proud of you. How much I wanted at that moment to unburden myself to my old friend, to confess that I didn't feel the same as before prison, that I wanted my own life back again. But before I could say a thing, she grabbed my hands. "Viva la mariposa," she whispered with feeling. I gave her the bright, brave smile she also required of me. Our spirits were so high with the good news we couldn't wait for Thursday to tell the men. The night before, we were almost festive as we rolled our hair in the bedroom so it would curl for our men the next day. We always did this, no matter how gloomy we were feeling. And they noticed it, too. It was a fact, we had all compared notes, that our men got more romantic the longer they were in prison. Patria claimed that Pedrito, a man of few words if ever there was one, was composing love poems for her and reciting them during visiting hours. The most embarrassing part, she admitted, was that this made her start feeling that way right there in the middle of the prison hall, surrounded by guards. Dede sat by, watching our preparations with displeasure. She had gotten into the habit of staying over the nights before our visits. She said she had to be at Mama's early the next day anyhow, to help with all the children once we left. But really, she was there to convince us not to go. "You're exposing yourselves to an accident by going down altogether," Dede began. "That's what you're doing." We all knew what kind of accident she meant. Just a month ago, Marrero had been found at the foot of a cliff, having supposedly lost control of his car. "Burnigal's drivers are very reliable," Patria reassured her. "Think of how many orphans you'd be leaving behind, how many widowers, and Mother de luto for the rest of her life." Dede could really pour on the tragedy. I don't know if it was nerves or what, but all three of us burst out laughing. Dede stood up and announced she was going home. "Come on, Dede," I called as she headed out the door. "There's a curfew. Be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Her voice was seething with anger. "If you think I'm going to sit by and watch you all commit suicide, you're wrong." She didn't make it past the front gate. The seam sent her back. She slept on the couch, and the next morning wouldn't talk to us all through breakfast. When she turned away as we went to kiss her goodbye, I decided to use her own fears on her. "Come on, Dede. Think how sorry you'd be if something should happen to us and you didn't say goodbye." She stiffened with resistance, but the second the driver turned on the engine, she ran to the car, sobbing. She blurted out the one loss she hadn't mentioned the night before. "I don't want to have to live without you." The atmosphere in prison was bright with hope. The voices in the visitors' hall had a lift to them. Now and then there was laughter. The news had spread there already. Sanctions had been imposed. The gringos were closing down their embassy. Only Manolo, like Dede, was not convinced. He seemed gloomier than ever. "What is it?" I asked between passings of the guard. "Isn't it good news?" He shrugged. Then, seeing my worried face, he smiled. But it was a smile for my benefit, I could tell. I noticed for the first time that some of his front teeth were broken off. "We'll be home soon." I always tried to raise his spirits with the thought of our little nest in Monte Cristi. The owners, old friends of Manolo's parents, were allowing us to keep our things there until the day they should find a new tenant. Strangely enough, it gave me hope to know our little house, the only home we'd ever shared, was still intact. Manolo leaned towards me, his lips grazing my cheek, a kiss to mask what he had to say. Our cells, are they ready? So that's what was worrying him. He didn't know that the revolution was out of our hands. Others were now in charge. Who? He persisted. I hated to tell him I didn't know, that we were totally disconnected at Mama's. The guard was passing by, so I remarked instead about the plantain fritters we had eaten the night before. Nobody knows who they are, I mouthed when the guard was safely down the row. Manolo's eyes grew big in his pale face. This could be a plant. Find out who's left. His grip tightened until my hands felt numb, but I would never tell him to let go. We were watched around the clock, our visits supervised. Even food vendors had their baskets checked at the gate. When and how and whom was I to contact? And if I tried, I'd only be risking more lives. But it was more than that. I had to put on too good a show for Manolo as well. He didn't know the double life I was leading. Outwardly, I was still his calm, courageous compañera. Inside, the woman had got the upper hand. And so the struggle with her began, the struggle to get my old self back from her. Late in the night, I'd lie in bed, thinking, you must gather up the broken threads and tie them together. Secretly, I hoped that events would settle the matter for me, and, along with everyone else, I honestly believed we were seeing the last days of the regime. Shortages were everywhere. Trujillo was doing all the crazy things of a trapped animal. In church, in a drunken stupor, he had seized the chalice and dispensed communion to his frightened attendants. The Pope was talking about excommunication. But with everyone against him and no one left to impress, Trujillo didn't have to hold himself back anymore. One morning, soon after sanctions went into effect, we woke up to the sound of sirens on the road. Trucks were roaring by, full of soldiers. The dead did not appear that morning, and since that one was like clockwork, we knew something was wrong. The next day, Elsa brought the very news we'd been waiting for, with the conclusion we had dreaded. 2 nights ago, after dark, a group of young men had run through Santiago, distributing leaflets under doors, urging an uprising. Every last one of them had been caught. They will find out what it is to run a comb through tangled hair, Elsa quoted Trujillo's reaction to the young rebels' capture. Peña came by late that afternoon. All further visits to La Victoria were canceled. But why? I blurted out. And then bitterly I added, we wrote the letter. Peña narrowed his eyes at me. He hated to be asked questions that implied he wasn't in charge of things. Why don't you write another letter to El Jefe and ask him to explain himself to you? She's just upset. We all are, Patria explained. She made a pleading face for me to be nice. Aren't you just upset, Minerva? I'm very upset, I said, folding my arms. It was the end of September before visiting days were reinstated at La Victoria, and we got to see the men. That morning when we picked up our passes, Peña gave us a warning look. But we were all so relieved, we answered him with smiles and too many thank yous. All the way down in the car we rented, with the driver, we were giddy with anticipation. Mate told some of her favorite riddles. We all pretended not to know, so she could have the pleasure of answering them herself. The thing Adam had in front that Eva had in back was the letter A.